Welcome to the Wonder Women of Aviation podcast. On today's episode, we speak with Jessica Anderson. Jessica is the director of the new documentary called The Flight of Jackie Cochran. This film brings to life the story of one of aviation's most extraordinary and often overlooked pioneers. Without giving too much away, we talk about the making of the film, a few little known details about Jackie, as well as discuss the history of women in World War II aviation and beyond, and how they were often overlooked for decades by historians and aviators alike. If you enjoy aviation stories, you're going to love this episode. And make sure to like and subscribe to the Wonder Women of Aviation podcast because, listen, we've got great interviews in the making, and you are not going to want to miss a single one of them.
Welcome back to the Wonder Woman of Aviation podcast. Today, I'm excited to introduce a new voice joining the podcast, Theresa Eaman. Theresa is a professional vocalist and a World War II reenactor who brings the beauty and spirit and the era of that back to life. So, Theresa, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. If nothing else, I'm a great talker. This is great.
I love it. I figured this would be perfect. And not to forget, we're also here with director Jessica Anderson, who is also making her debut with the documentary The Flight of Jackie Cochran, which we had an exclusive sneak peek preview, and we're going to definitely talk about it. I know, I was so excited. I absolutely loved it. But Jackie Cochran was one of the most extraordinary and overlooked figures in the aviation history, and Jessica's film shines a light on her story in just a powerful way. So we're going to get into that, and I'm so excited to dive into this conversation and just learn more about Jessica. How did you catch wind of Jackie? All the fun things. So let's start with the beginning. For someone who's never heard of Jackie Cochran, how do you really introduce her in the film?
Yeah, the film itself, we kind of dive into, obviously she's very Googleable. Even though she's unknown in some circles, she is Googleable because she broke so many records in aviation, both in sound, speed, and distance. And so we do talk about that in the documentary. We also cover her early childhood, which is something that isn't really publicly known about her. She's actually from the area that I live currently, which is in the Panhandle of Florida in Walton County. And that's how I really got wind of her story. Was Nancy Hasty, who is a local here, actually developed a relationship with the family, and she also wrote and directed and performs along with her husband, who directed a play about her life. And so through introducing to Nancy through Dave King, my executive producer, I was able to learn about her. Nancy has done extensive research into her childhood, her upbringing, not only that, all of the accolades that she did and everything that kind of built Jackie into who she was. And so it was a really interesting story to dive into with Nancy and kind of get down to why don't we know about her and why is she kind of a figure that's fallen in the shadows. And that's kind of what the documentary goes into as we ask the question, why?
Okay. And then that was actually one of my questions.
No, sorry.
Why do you think we don't hear about Jackie? I know, people hear about Amelia Earhart. I know everyone's heard about Amelia, but, Jackie I didn't hear about her until I started learning about the women Air Force service pilots.
Yeah. And honestly, not to give the spoilers away in the film, but why... I really think there is a bit of a Marilyn Monroe effect that happens with public figures. Jackie passed away in 1980, so she lived well into her life. Whereas Amelia Earhart, obviously we know that her plane went down in the Pacific and, she was lost at sea. And that was publicized a lot. And I think that's really kind of written into American culture and why we know about her. We asked the question, if Marilyn Monroe had lived out her life, would she have the same effect as someone who had passed at a young age?
That's a fair question.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's why I kind of call it the Marilyn Monroe effect in a way, of someone that is forgotten, because she did so many things, not only in flight, but she also ran for Congress. Obviously, she didn't win, but she did a lot of things throughout her life, and I think sometimes figures can be forgotten in that way because they don't die in some tragic way. And so, yeah.
Wow. I love that analogy, the Marilyn Monroe effect. I've never heard that.
It really
Yeah,
makes you
I'll have to
think
coin that.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
you should. You should. Because I mean, I think there's some real truth in it. Because while you were explaining that, I was thinking about, like Madonna and all those other
Mhm.
people that, they've become so, like, such a common name at this point, and Michael Jackson, for all of his controversy, he was more popular in death towards the end there. My kids had never heard of him. But
Mhm.
once he passed and I started listening to his music, they're like, oh, wow. And I think we're going to see the same thing with women like Jackie,
Mm.
because your movie's going to bring this into the public eye and get her known in a way she wasn't in real life.
Yeah, and the film itself, what I really wanted to achieve was not to just show this glamorous life of Jackie Cochran, but to show the hardships as well that come with life and getting to that kind of fame. There's a lot of things that people go through, and it's not all rainbows and butterflies. There's a lot of struggle, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of resilience that you need to have in order to succeed.
That was one of the things that I noticed when I was watching the movie and thought about, especially when you were exploring her early life, the fact that she experienced not just the struggles that women experienced back then trying to do anything at all, but, relationship issues and trying to find a way to pay for her interests and her other stuff. Like,
Mhm.
man, I can so relate to that. And I can't
Yeah.
imagine what it must have been like all the way back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, if you will. And what an amazing woman to be able to do all the things she did during a time when it was hard for women to barely do anything at all.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you look at who she was, and one of the questions that I've had extensive conversation with Nancy about is she put herself into rooms with men during 1830s and 40s, and it was a time when women were kind of no, like kind
Yeah.
of dismissed in ways, and honestly, women are still dismissed and to some extent. I think the film really touches on that aspect of she not only broke the sound barrier, the first woman to,
Mhm.
she broke barriers in the fact that she put herself into those places of high up generals, presidents,
Yeah.
putting herself into those places. I think it took a lot of courage. And you kind of have to ask, how was she able to do that in a place where women were kind of, again, kind of go over there, go sit down.
Go cook some
She
dinner
did.
because that's what you're
Yeah,
good at.
And go make some
exactly.
babies. And I think
Yes.
understanding those struggles definitely, I mean, it helped me understand like how resilient she was. I didn't know how
Mhm.
badass she was. I was like, wow, this woman is amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
definitely.
now I'm curious more about you. How did you come across Jackie? Do you come from an
Yeah.
aviation background or how did you stumble?
No, honestly, the only aviation background I have is my dad was in the Air Force. My nephew now, who is in his 20s, is flying for the military in the Air Force, and my sister was in the Navy. So that's as much military background as I have. I do live in the Panhandle, so I am right there in between like Eglin and Tyndall and other bases that are in this
Okay.
area. So this area is very populated with a lot of military life. But myself, I know nothing about aviation,
Okay.
especially when it comes to planes and things like that. No, I was introduced to the story through Dave King, who is the executive producer on the film, and he
Mhm.
introduced me to Nancy and her
Okay.
story. Nancy, like I said, she developed the play about Jackie Cochran's life, which is actually based on the book Superwoman Jacqueline Cochran by Billy
Oh,
Pittman and Beth Dees. So that's where she really got all this information about Jackie. And when talking to Nancy, we were kind of like, can we make a documentary about this? Because we started researching, and the
yeah.
family actually tried to make a film at one time, but it fell through. If you look into that, there were some sort of like Hollywood ties back at, I want to say like probably 15, 20 years ago. They wanted to make a film out of it. It didn't go through. And documentaries are kind of my specialty. and something that I love to do. So when I hear about a historical figure like this, I had to kind of jump on it and be able to tell it through my lens and a modern lens. And so I was really excited to have Nancy on my side and support from her to, pick her brain. Who is this
Yeah.
character? And really be able to dive into deep conversation with her about her life.
And I love that you did that because there's not a lot of documentaries of women in aviation in general. So the fact that I stumbled upon it, I did a podcast with Victoria Yeager and I was reading Chuck Yeager's autobiography and then he talks about Jackie and then I started researching Jackie and then poof, I found you and I'm like, okay, so it led me to you, which was, kind of interesting.
Yeah, and Chuck Yeager and Jackie flew together. I mean, they were co-pilots in a lot of different times. I think Chuck really kind of valued their friendship, and again, in a time when most men would probably not, and so that really speaks to Chuck's character in general, as an aviator and a man.
Oh
He
yeah.
was so complicated, but for all of his faults and things people didn't like about him, then on the opposite end of the scale, here he is promoting women and doing all of these very forward thinking things. And I think that's what makes him, and probably her in the same way, a really interesting subject for a documentary.
hmm Well, it's funny that you say that because, I think that probably brought them together
Yeah.
as friends, not
Yeah.
just people in aviation and interested in the same things, but I think on a friendship level, there was definitely something deeper there that I wish I could go more into,
I
but
know. Yeah.
films have budgets and films, I can only do so much with what I've got.
Yeah.
It was really interesting for me to travel to the Smithsonian Museum and sit down with the Smithsonian and have them talk about Jackie. Some of the things that were left on the cutting room floor, I asked the Smithsonian, why isn't there a special exhibit for women in aviation? And
Yeah.
it was kind of described as when they were first trying to curate the spaces, there's different exhibits within the Smithsonian. Dorothy said, she kind of wanted women to be throughout the uh throughout the museum instead of it being like a specific thing
Mm.
for women because she wanted them to be kind of a part of it with the men just as much, which is an interesting take because you'd think,
Yeah.
why isn't there like a women in aviation, that should be
Section.
like a thing, but it's interesting to hear that perspective from the museum itself. So I
Keeping them
found
on
that.
equal footing.
Yes, exactly. Instead of raising it to some extent of like, we did that wrong or something.
Yeah.
Um,
I can see that.
I-
and honestly, hearing the Smithsonian talk about her and being able to go there and see her T-38 Talon hanging right there in the museum, was amazing. The Air and Space Museum is going through a lot of renovations right now, or at least they were when I did the interview. And they have these plaques that are on the floor that are like tiled in. And there is a quote from Jackie Cochran that's in the Space Museum. So if you're ever in DC and go there, it's on the second floor. And that's where her talent is hanging. She's also in the Speed Museum or the Speed exhibit. Her flight suit and her trophy are there in that exhibit. So it's just really cool to see her acknowledged and recognized in that space because otherwise, when you Google her, you're like, wait, hang on. How do I not know about this woman? And to see her there in the museum was really, really special.
I honestly asked myself that question when Natalia sent
too.
me the video and I started watching it. I'm like, I have been in the aviation circle for over 20 years. How am I just hearing about this amazing woman? And so I think it is wonderful that you're
Yeah.
bringing this to the world to be able to hear her story, even if it is posthumously.
Thank you. Yes, I
You're welcome.
appreciate that.
I felt the same way. I was like, I knew of her, but when I don't want to give too much away. It's so hard because I want to talk about the
I know.
documentary.
Yeah.
But you brought us into her life, and the way you captured her story was so much deeper than what we know or what people may know of Jackie. You hit a lot of topics that may be controversial, may not be controversial. And it was just enlightening just to learn more about her. And that was another question I had, going into the research and discovery, like, why now? Like, what made you do the documentary at this point in your life?
Yeah, like I said, I've worked on documentaries before. In Wong County, I created about 30 documentaries, short film documentaries that were historic about our area. And honestly, I went to school to be a history major, and then I realized that what was I going to do with that? I changed majors.
Me too.
And so, history has always been a huge part of my life. And I can thank my dad for that, really getting me into history. And honestly, I'm fascinated by World War II history. And I took a lot of classes in college about that subject. When you're met with that and really diving into um, her influence into World War II, you really start to uncover, wow, this is really interesting what she contributed to that kind of war that was so important, at the time, and the women that she brought into that.
Do you think that you have a greater interest in World War II aviation now than you had before? Because aviation was so interwoven with World War II because we didn't have planes. I mean, the planes were just starting at the tail end of World War I. It's really World War II where we see the full usage of airplanes. Do you think that now you have a greater interest, or are you still more?
No, definitely a greater interest. I mean, how can I not? Right. Especially in the film, I go to Sweetwater, Texas, which is where the Wasp Museum is located.
Right.
And Lisa Taylor is the executive director and the curator of that museum. And speaking with her, when I initially reached out, I mean, that was a cold call out of nowhere. I was like, who could I get onto this film, and who could I have to really speak in a historical way about this? And when I told her what I was doing, and she was just thrilled. And honestly, she was like, and I even say in the documentary, if you hear about women in aviation at all during that time, if you hear about the WASP, you're not really going to learn about Jackie Cochran. So that was really interesting. And that's why I put so much of the WASP into the film, because I think that and I know that, Natalia, you mentioned that, there is a film out there about the WASP, which is great. And I think even more of that, needs to be poured into that place of our history, because there's a lot of women that risk their lives. There are women that did pass during flying those planes. I think women in general during that time, I mean, up to World War II and even that point of the WASP, women in the military were very much, there is that Rosie the Riveter type of feel of do your part for the war. You were either a nurse or you were kind of hammering nails into planes. You weren't in that, I don't want to say combat, but you weren't in those planes. You weren't recognized and trained and all that stuff that the women in the WASP were able to go through. And I think along with Nancy Love, who was the one that initially started everything, and then Jackie came in kind of like a bulldozer and just was like, let's move this even further. And I think women like that, while she made enemies and friends along the way, it does take a kind of that bulldoze mentality to put women into those positions and bring them along with them. And it's kind of funny because you look at Jackie, and she wasn't a feminist, which is interesting because she kind of uplifted all these women to that place. But in the same regard, she wanted women to not only just be good pilots and be smart and be, able to fly, but she wanted them to dress and keep themselves as a woman, wear your makeup, do your hair, keep yourself clean is kind of that piece of the film that I talk about. And I think that was a huge part of Jackie's childhood that I think really played into how she viewed women later in life.
I love that. Yeah. And I love the question that you asked, Theresa, like, did it start, bringing in more curiosity into that era? Because for me, that's exactly what it did. Like, I feel like I opened up Pandora's box when you learn about like the WASP, you learn about Jackie, learn about it just keeps growing. And I'm like, why aren't these stories out here? And it makes you kind of mad.
It does. Not to talk about myself, but it's in context. I started singing these air shows at the World War II weekend in Reading, which is the largest World War II air show in the world. It was years of doing that before I heard anything about the wasps. And it wasn't until I got to the air show here at Monroe where I actually met one. I was in my 40s before I heard
Wow.
about the contribution of women to the war effort. And it was shameful.
Yeah.
But you look back, I have a copy of the book Fee Finella, and I'm so mad because I didn't think of it until today, and it's in my storage unit, and I'm like, do I have enough time to go get it and put it in the background? Because I got that book when I started learning about the wasps, and they had a couple here in Monroe. And I think we've done a big disservice to these women, like you said, who made these huge sacrifices, family, or they were doing the family thing and the flying thing and the Rosie the Riveter thing.
Yeah.
I think they were forgotten, and I'm so grateful to people like you and everyone else who's bringing these women back into the forefront because it's such a important component.
It is. It is. And honestly, bringing this story to life really wouldn't even happen without Dave King and, my partnership with the Sowell Foundation, which is a nonprofit that helps filmmakers bring their stories to life. That really enabled me to be able to go out to the Smithsonian, to go to the Wasp Museum, to interview locals, hear about what was life like, in the industry that she grew up in. And it's just combining all those pieces, I think really bring her story in a well-rounded way. And I also include a psychologist that kind of looks at Jackie's life from like a case study perspective. When I interviewed the psychologist, she didn't know really who Jackie was. I did kind of put it in a way of like, in situations like this, what would happen, or what have you seen, or what is documented as to how people move through that type of thing. And, Jackie experienced poverty, she experienced loss, but through those things, she came out the other side and became this success. And I think it's really important to remember that everyone has a story. Jackie had one. And the more I can kind of get eyes on this and to see her story, I think the better. And honestly, I want to bring as many eyes onto this as possible. So I just really appreciate you guys being able to have me to talk about her story to you guys and for you guys to see what we did with the documentary. And I'm really proud of what we accomplished.
So how are people going to get to see this? Because now I'm sure we've got all this interest now. It's
I know.
Sure.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. So, right now we are in consideration for a regional Emmy. So we'll find out about that in October. And so until then, with that, we hope that will enable us to take it to film festivals, get our foot in the door in those places, and to kind of bring that to the film festival world. That's the next phase of this project. It was just completed this past summer. So now we're into the beginning stages of phase 2, which is film festivals, private screenings for donors, friends, and family, just to kind of get the word out, media. We've done some outreach there. So, just kind of getting as many people talking about this project in general will really help us get into those film festivals, because it's a tough thing.
It is.
I know we talked about in our first conversation about, bringing it to the air shows. I mean, that is something that I didn't even think about, that I'm like, whoa, phase 3. Hello.
Yeah, to Air Venture.
We'll engage.
I have a contact.
Yeah, I would love
For you.
to. I would love to bring it to air shows. And I think it really speaks to her story is so interesting in the fact that it does speak to pilots in general. I think a lot of pilots, I reference it at the end of the film, and it's a take on the way that Jackie felt when she was up in the clouds. And what I've found from people in aviation, and even talking to my nephew about it who flies, there is a certain peace that you reach when you're up above the clouds and you're in the air. And I think for a lot of people who do or have gone through struggles or have gone through things like loss or upbringings not so favorable, it is almost like therapy in a way for pilots. And I think that's why flying is so addictive. Once you
Yeah.
get started, you can't stop. Jackie flew. I mean, she flew well into her age. She passed because of due to her heart, because of the speed that she went, because she went so fast. It really did a number to her heart. And so that's kind of why she passed.
That's a good lesson in when something is part of your very soul, you give essentially your life to it.
Mhm.
And she's a perfect example of this was such a passion for her that she died for it.
Yeah. It's a beautiful
Yeah,
way to put it.
yeah, it's almost poetic,
Yeah.
and I think it's funny because you know, the the play, if you ever hear Nancy Hasty bringing her play to
Yeah.
town, you have to go see it, and
Absolutely.
I'll connect you guys, and she'll come and perform it. But she goes into, there are pieces in the documentary. I could have paid an actress to play Jackie Cochran, but the more I looked into it, I was like, no, Nancy Hasty, you are Jackie, and you really you carry her so well, and you've done such a great job of finding her story. There's really no one else I'd rather play Jackie than you. So, in documentaries, you have that interview. I have that interview side of the documentary, but then I also have um, kind of dramatic reenactments, and they are excerpts from the play. And I use that in a way that Jackie is able to kind of tell her story
Hmm.
and to share the intimate details about her life. And, from as a young kid, the Mrs. Boswick who, really kind of took her under her wing and showed her how to keep herself clean and to dress a certain way and to, act proper and all that. One of the things I don't cover in the documentary is that Jackie only went to the second grade.
No way.
Yeah.
I did not know
Yeah.
that.
She only went to the
Wow.
second grade. I mean, you think about where she came from, which was the sawmills industry is what her family was in. And the sawmill industry, very, I don't want to say transient because it's not transient. It was more, almost like project based, kind of like the military where you'll have like, I'm here for a while. Now I'm here for a
Yeah.
while because you cut down all those trees and then you move on, and that was the industry up here at the time, was, clear cutting all the longleaf pine that we have here and using it for lumber and things like that. Cypress trees were used in New York. Anyway, I'm a huge history buff. I could go into all that history of this area, but when she's going through all this stuff and having someone in your life that kind of takes you out of that and shows you kind of how to be and how to get out of it. I think it really changed her life. And I think it really kind of set her down that path. And I even reference at the end, trauma and things that happen in your life can either really bring you down and keep you down, or it can give you fuel. And, that's what Jackie did, is she put it in the plane and she took off.
Well, she did. Absolutely. And I love how you brought us, you mentioned, the way you told the story, you brought us into her mindset with like having her tell the story from her
Yeah.
perspective. And that's what I absolutely loved, which leads me to my other question. What do you hope people feel or take away when they leave that screening of, the film?
Yeah, I honestly, I want people to start immediately Googling who Jackie Cochran is when they leave that theater. I think a lot of people walk in going, I know history, I know aviation, I know exactly what this will be about. And then you watch it and you're like, hang on, I guess I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the number one thing that I hope for, is that reaction of, there are characters in history that are forgotten. And I think
Hmm.
it's important to remember them in a way that is respectful, and remember them in a way that, they were people too. And I don't know, just, yeah, I guess, but I would get emotional about it, but I really just want people to understand that Jackie was so much more than even an aviator. And it's incredible because the WASP Museum was able to give me that clip of Jackie speaking. And I think that was so powerful. And it's like a 10-minute clip. I wish I could play it all, but I just couldn't.
Yeah.
But the clip that I do use in the film talks about how she was really excited about women in aviation kind of getting what they deserved in recognition. And that was a huge piece of her mission, was to get the women that were in the WAS recognized in the military.
Mhm.
She was unsuccessful in that, but I think she did everything she could, especially during that time.
Well, as I was watching it, I thought, what an inspiration, especially for girls in their teenage years who may have experienced some of the similar trauma that she has experienced.
Yeah.
And if they see a film like this, whether it's in school or at a screening or online, they can see that, yes, life is hard, but it is possible to overcome it, because we're seeing a woman who was overcoming it when women were dismissed. And we're in one would argue, a more enlightened period for women. It's hard to tell sometimes, but
Mhm.
that this is possible for you to achieve whatever dream that is.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the great things about the film, and it is really engaging the way you put it together.
Mhm.
So
I
I
appreciate
loved
that.
it.
Yeah, I was a theater minor, so I think it really speaks to in
yeah, I
college.
was
I could see
wondering,
I could see
how
that.
did how did you get into the documentary filmmaking?
Yeah,
Because it sounds like you were a history major,
yeah,
but
yeah,
then now you're a theater minor. Were you a
yeah.
film major?
No, no, actually, I wasn't. I was going to be a teacher.
Oh,
Of course.
That's what I got my degree
makes
in.
sense.
And no, I'm actually from Los Angeles. I was raised in Los Angeles. I went to school at Cal Lutheran University, which is just north of LA, south of Santa Barbara. You know, I grew up there. My sister was actually in the Navy here in the Panhandle, and I would always go visit her. And I just really fell in love. And, you know, you graduate college and you say, what am I going to do with my life? And so I ended up here, and I actually met my husband. And you know, so I'm here now. So I met my husband, and we have our baby. He's 8 months old. You know, I built a beautiful life here in the Panhandle, and I really love the small town atmosphere. I think that's what I was always missing in California. And always say the irony of my life is that while growing up in LA, I never wanted to do film, and then I got here 3,000 miles away, and I realized I want to do films.
That's funny.
And
That's the irony.
one thing you told me too when we had a conversation earlier was that you created the film right after while you were pregnant, or it's
Yes,
just
I was pregnant during the major filming of the documentary. Yeah, I was very
Wow.
pregnant traveling, so that it got a little uncomfortable traveling at some points during the films. Yeah, and then I had my baby this past February in 2025. You know, the film completed in June, so it's been a crazy year for sure. Just kind of getting everything done. I thought I would finish it before I had my baby, but you know,
Women
I
are
got
nothing if not multitaskers.
yep.
right, right. And so I think it kind of speaks to, you know, women can do anything.
Oh yeah,
You can do
absolutely.
it. You can even make a film while going through all that. So, but it's definitely changed my perspective, or even going through pregnancy and then having my son. I think, you know, in the film, I touch on one of the traumatic events that happened in her life, which is really unknown about her life, and kind of, I think, a pivotal moment in the film itself that kind of touches all mothers in that film. And I really had to include that bit. I always knew I wanted to, but now that I am a mother, I think it hits me a lot different. Even watching it back, my heart aches. So I'll say
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
about the
That was
pivotal.
really
That was smooth. I
That
was like,
was a
how is she
pivotal
in a maneuver?
moment.
nice
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, I just, you know, and I really feel like, you know, there are certain things that Jackie tried to hide about her life. You know, the first third of her autobiography is made up. You know, there's plaques that are at the, oh, forgive me, there's the airfield that's in Texas. Is it
Vengerfield?
Avenger?
Yeah,
Yes.
Vengerfield.
There is a plaque there, and it does say that she was an orphan. And Jackie, you know, if you look her up, it'll say we don't really know where she was born. The year is somewhat ambiguous. Where she grew up is very ambiguous. She went to kind of lengths to hide that side of her. And I think that comes with shame, which is all human. This is all human. And I really wanted to look at Jackie's life through a modern lens and look at it through kind of like a psychological case, like I've said. And, I think it's really important to remember that even though it was a different time, we can still kind of look at her life in a modern way and realize that, it was really, really hard. It was a really, really hard time for her, and kind of survival kicks in, at that point. And, you do what you have to do to survive.
It's true.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, congratulations on the film. Congratulations on
Thank
completing the
you.
film. In closing, I wanted to ask a very unique question. After spending so much time with Jackie's story, if you could sit down with her today yourself, what's the one question you would ask her?
Truly, the question that's really always bugged me about the film and about her, learning about her life is, you know, tell me why, tell me why, or how are things when you grew up, what was it that shaped you? What was the moment that shaped you? I mean, I can assume in certain ways, but what was the moment that really shaped you into putting that energy into your tank and taking off? What was the catalyst? And that's something that I've talked to Nancy in lengths about. It's whole personality. She did make enemies. She wasn't the most well liked in Washington. She married a billionaire, which is how she was able to fund a lot of her things, because she didn't have to worry about money. But starting her makeup company and getting to New York. I mean, how did she do that? There is such a gap in her life. I would say after like 18, between 18 and like, what would that be like if she was born in I'm sorry, I'm trying to do math. What was her going on in her life between that like early 1920s to early 1930s? What was going on in her life then? Where was she? I've talked to Nancy how she might have been a nail tech in Pensacola. I think she was a hairdresser in Georgia somewhere. So
Yeah.
it's really kind of, where was she? What was she doing? And I know that she got away from the life that she was living, but what was she doing and how did she get to where she is? That would be the question I would have for her. I mean, I'm really interested in that portion of things. And then honestly, I'd ask her a two-part question is, how was it how did you get into those rooms? How was talking to General Hap Arnold? Like, what was that like for a woman during that time to exist in aviation? I think she tried to surround herself with aviation, and she always was a part of making sure she was in charge there for all like speed records and things like that. And, she won the Harmon Trophy 14 times. It's kind of like aviation was her life. And so I'd really want to dive into what was that like during that time, because I'm sure maybe it has similarities to women that are going through aviation in modern day.
Right. I'm sure there's some similar struggles. Obviously, modern day, I mean, even learning to fly myself, there's certain struggles. But when I talk to more and more women, I'm like, oh my gosh, you feel that way too? Like, okay,
Mhm.
this is interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I think just really getting her story out there, I just really want the film to relate to someone on some level, whether it be a mother or someone going through
Mhm.
something or looking for that kind of spark of inspiration to overcome, or even just from a historical perspective of just learning about a woman that did all these things. And not only that, if you even know about Jackie Cochran, I bet you didn't know as much as dive into
Yeah.
all the WASP details that I go into, and all the things that the women had to go through in the training to fly those planes. I mean, really, men were like, women can't fly planes. And that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really hope the film would uplift someone, and it's not to really, talk about her early childhood and any negative light. It's more to just build this like modern look on overcoming. And I think that's the overall goal of the film that I try to get across, is that you can do anything, and you can come from anywhere, and you can achieve whatever it is you put your mind to. And there's a quote by um, a Hollywood actor, I think it's Seth Rogen, or he says that the only way that you're not going to succeed is if you quit. Like, you can
Yeah.
succeed if you just keep going, and
Yeah.
if you quit, you're definitely not going to succeed.
Right.
There's truth in that. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
at least
So
try.
yeah, exactly. You have to try, and you have to keep persevering, and no matter what that looks like from your situation, and whether you're a woman or anything. I think women have really struggled with finding their place in aviation and in the military in general. And luckily, we've come a long way, but it took a long time to even get where we are.
Absolutely. Well, I know you mentioned the film is going to come out sometime this year, but is there a website that we can learn more information about the film and
Yeah.
about yourself?
Yeah, so JackieCochranFilm.com, all the information about the film is there. You can also sign up to view a extended trailer of the film, and honestly, please go do that because I love to show interest in the film and this topic, and it would really give me a great amount of data to point to as far as, look at how many people are interested in this story and have already, wanted to see what it is and what it's about, and let me bring it to all the places. I would really love to show this all over, once we go through the film festival cycle. I'd really like to, be able to screen this at, um, you know, World War II events, or, aviation events, or, just museums in general. I just really like to do that with the film and use it as an educational tool.
Well, Oshkosh has a women
Yeah.
in aviation component, but they also have a place where they show films just like
Mhm.
this
I told
and
her,
then
yeah.
do an interview component. So, whenever you're ready, let Natalia
I'm
know. And
ready.
between the
I
two
am
of us,
ready.
Oh, yeah.
we have a
I'm
couple.
ready. Yeah. You've already connected me. So I
Yeah,
am,
I
I
did
am
connect her.
hoping that all that comes through. Like I said, we're kind of on that phase 2 of the film now, and it's kind of just the beginning. And that's why we're just getting started, where I hope to show it more and more places.
Well, and if that, whatever happens there also, Natalia, and both of you,
Yeah.
my involvement with the Warbirds in Review component of Oshkosh is entirely separate from the other two things that I talked to you about. And
Yeah.
there is some opportunity there. So I'll get some contact information
I
to
love it.
you, because there are so many people, and I, it's the whole algorithm thing, and you want
Mhm.
people to know how many people, you know, I know exactly what you're saying. So if people are listening, please go to that website,
Yeah.
because those numbers alone are really important for getting backing to have this film seen.
No, it's a number. I'm working right now to, get it into some film festivals at the beginning of 2026. Hopefully, fingers crossed, something comes of the Emmy consideration, and we can use that in our favor to promote and to bring it to more and more places. Not only that, I've talked to Lisa Taylor over there at World War II Museum, the Wasp Museum, and so I'd love to bring it there for a screening. And I'm just really looking for anyone who is interested in Jackie, and bringing Jackie's story to their local market. I'm happy to bring that story and show it to whoever they may want.
I love that. So you hear that? If you're listening and you want her story, definitely reach out to Jessica via her website.
Please.
Please help get the word out of a wonderful
I have
story,
nothing.
wonderful woman.
Jackie is a Wonder Woman of Aviation. So if you're listening to our podcast, make sure you support this endeavor to bring out another wonderful woman who's done so much for aviation. And thank you so much for making the video.
I
Didn't know
appreciate it.
anything.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And thank you for being on the Wonder Woman of Aviation. And thank you, Theresa, for co-hosting our first endeavor together.
I might be fired. I don't know. I talk too much.
No, it's amazing. And for those of you listening, we will catch you guys next time.